I'm joined now by member of Scottish Parliament, Patrick Harvey. Thank you so much for joining me.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So we are right now in a moment where Donald Trump is currently in Scotland. I'm curious for you and your colleagues, how is he being received there?
Well, there are a small handful of people who would welcome Donald Trump and who would share values with him, but they are by far and away the minority. For example, there was a demonstration in Glasgow yesterday calling for the kind of mass deportation program which is currently happening in the US. The counter protest from people standing up and saying refugees are welcome here was far bigger than that racist pro-deportation rally that took place. And that's the pattern in many, many parts of the country. The people who are calling for opposition to the values that Donald Trump represents, whether that's on climate, whether that's on immigration, whether it's on economic policy, whether it's on the basic defense of democratic values, the people opposing Trump and what he stands for are far more numerous. And there was a big rally outside the US consulate yesterday in Edinburgh, which I and some colleagues went along to take part in. And it showed a great deal of anger, actually, about not just what the US is doing, particularly supporting genocide in Palestine, but also the way governments in this country, in Scotland and the UK, are not doing enough to stand up to those values and to call out the lies, the conspiracy theories, and the grift that is the far right these days.
There is a sense right now, because the last 3 weeks we have spent speaking about Donald Trump's links that he's very clearly trying to hide between him and deceased Jeffrey Epstein and currently incarcerated Ghislaine Maxwell. Here in the States, he has thrown out every distraction under the book, spoken about how he's trying to get cane sugar back in Coca-Cola, looking to denaturalize Rosie O'Donnell, who's currently in Ireland, looking to change the name of a local football team, the Washington Commanders, back to a previous name. And then, of course, the arrest threats. So we've got, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, Oprah, Beyonce, Al Sharpton, the list goes on and on. To what degree do you think his visit to your country is an effort to further perpetuate this distraction?
Well, I'm not going to pretend that I know the answer to that. I'm very firmly of the view that we shouldn't really try and ascribe rational, coherent thought to this person. I don't think he thinks in that way. I genuinely think he inhabits a universe in which the single biggest entity is his own ego. And I don't think we should really try to understand his thinking in strictly rational terms, any more than we try to understand his rhetoric in rational terms. I think we need to be very clear about the things that he does. And the things that he does are already costing huge numbers of lives, not just in the US, but around the world. The slashing of international aid, the support for the very, very brutal, extreme violence being used against Palestinians, which in many people's view, in my view, amounts to genocide and war crimes. But also the way that he's attacking people in the US as well. Climate scientists being purged from US government institutions and academia, equality and human rights workers being purged in the same way. And individuals and migrant communities knowing that at any time a bunch of guys in masks can turn up and huckle people into vans, never to be seen again. This is brutality. This is state brutality, and we know in Europe where this ends up. So it's really essential that we call out the actions that are being taken, and I think that matters far more than trying to analyze the inner workings of this quite delusional man.
To that point, a lot of us from within the United States have we normalize to this on a daily basis because we see it happening right in front of our eyes. What was crazy a month ago now feels normal here. I think if you had asked any American, a couple of years ago what we would think if all of a sudden we had a government that would send out masked men with no insignia, no identification, to just grab people off the streets and throw them in vans where they may or may not be deported to some gulag in South America, we would have thought that was crazy, including Trump's MAGA base. And yet now it's a reality. But I'm curious, from the outside, what is your perception of America right now in light of these new developments?
It's difficult to put into simple words, to be honest. I think I've always had some quite conflicted feelings about the US. It is in many ways an extraordinary country, innovative, creative. It's had a cultural impact on the world that is breathtaking in many ways. I've always grown up with American ideas, American technology, American film and TV. People right around the world have done. America is in many ways a truly extraordinary country. And yet the deliberate performance of stupidity and ignorance has always had political value in a way that would be completely the opposite in many other parts of the world. I mean, someone like Ronald Reagan, for example, who was president when I was a child, was not a stupid man, but he played the role very well. That was why he came across in a relatable way, because he played that role. I think in many ways George W. Bush as well played up to his stereotype of not being quite so bright, because the idea of being intelligent enough for the role. Barack Obama was elected despite clearly having the intellectual capability to do the job. He was not elected because he had that capability. There's something, and there always has been, something quite weird to me about American politics in the way that the deliberate performance of ignorance seems to have political value. Trump obviously has taken that to a whole other level. And he's also worked in this technique that I think was developed by Putin, first of all, of disrupting the media to such an extent that nobody knows what's true anymore. The idea of there being an objective truth is just eroded because they, as they say, flood the zone with disinformation, with untruth, with conspiracy theories that are only designed to divide people against one another. So, the state of American politics looks worse than it has been. But I think it's an extension of something that's always been a quite strange aspect of how American politics works, even though America as a country, as a society, has done extraordinary things.
A lot of what Trump said he wanted to do, along with Republicans, is make America ascendant in the world again, protect our restore our reputation from what it was before. He claims that it was destroyed under his predecessor, Joe Biden. And yet a lot of the policies that he's taken, I mean, we've heard him say that he wants to strike up 90 deals in 90 days and the countries are going to be falling over themselves to get to the negotiating table. Is that what you've seen happen? Because from my vantage, it looks like the way that Donald Trump is comporting himself on the international community not only doesn't draw other countries in, not only isn't some carrot to get other countries to the negotiating table, but is in fact doing the opposite, is pushing our allies into the arms of our adversaries. And whereas he says he wants to push China away and restore our standing relative to China, in fact, it feels like he's pushing those countries into the arms of countries like China.
I think that's right. And there probably will be some exceptions to this general analysis that you set out. There probably will be some countries that will try to do a deal, this kind of simplistic language about get a deal done.
Right.
And what they get is that the bully hits them a little bit less hard than it hits the others. So, this notion of fawning to a bully, trying to appease a bully, never really works. But some countries may feel that they have no choice in the short term. But in the long term, particularly on energy and climate policy, I think Trump's agenda is already hurting Americans, and it's going to hurt Americans even more in the longer term. If you look at the pace of Chinese investment in renewables, not just in deploying renewables in their own country, but building those as industries for export. And this is the future of the world's energy system.
Yeah.
China is leaving America in the dust on renewables, on the wider transition to sustainable technology. And now, you don't have to be a green politician like myself, who's been, I was raised by a mum who was campaigning on environmental issues back in the 70s and 80s, right? So I'm kind of in with the bricks with the green movement. But you don't have to be from that kind of political background to
Right. You
know.
can look at it from an economic standpoint as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's very, very clear that fossil fuels are not going to power the future, either in terms of energy systems or in terms of our economies. And if we want to have a successful, viable, vibrant future, and the world can still choose to do that, sustainability, renewables, low carbon tech is going to be absolutely critical. And America is simply no longer playing that game. And that's going to be in no way in America's interest. That's going to damage your economic prospects and your standing in the world. It's entirely possible that in future generations, people will look back at roughly this point in history and see that the scale of renewable energy generation being produced by China compared with the US marks the point at which the US is in global decline.
Yeah, I mean, as sad as it is, I completely agree. And it's been clear for years now that not just Trump, but the entire Republican Party in this country, which has been in power on and off for the last few decades, their focus on kowtowing to dirty energy, fossil fuels, so that they can, I guess, consolidate some donations from that sector at the expense of investing in renewables and being able to take on China to match their rhetoric about China. I mean, it's just been the consequences of that, I think, to your exact point, are not only cataclysmic now, but we're going to look back at a point in the very near future, I fear, and recognize that this was the point at which America ceded its leadership on the global stage. And I guess to that point, recognizing that we are leaving a vacuum in this sector, and this is probably going to lead to a broader vacuum in America's leadership on the global stage. How committed are you and the rest of Europe and other countries around the world to actually picking up where the United States is leaving off in terms of making sure that we hit global environmental targets, so that we don't see global warming, so that we don't see sea level rise? I mean, we are basically at the point where if we don't take aggressive action, it will be too late. And I mean, God knows what that would usher in moving forward. We've already seen the extent to which extreme weather events have not only decimated parts of the world, but cost billions and billions and billions of dollars almost on an annual basis. And so going back to that question, what's the level of commitment in America's absence for the rest of the world to pick up where we've left off?
I really wish I could give you a wholly optimistic answer. I think I have to say that I still think we're at the point where both futures are possible, for not just for Europe, but for humanity as a whole. We still have time to begin to turn the tanker around. It takes a long time to make this transition. We're already locked into a certain amount of climate change, a certain amount of global heating, and a significant amount of continued environmental, social, economic, and human harm will come from that. But it's not too late to prevent the worst from happening. And we still have the option before us, if we commit to it, to build a sustainable economy for the future. But there is no guarantee of that. And for example, in something like the position of Europe, we see the far right on the rise in many European countries already. Even the centre right are now starting to abandon the commitments that they had on climate. It was a Conservative government in the UK that introduced the net zero target, the target of being net zero across the UK by 2050. A Conservative government introduced that into legislation. There had already been climate policy before that from the Labour government, but a Conservative government strengthened it. When the first Climate Act went through the Scottish Parliament, all 5 political parties in Parliament were moving amendments to strengthen that legislation. None of them were trying to weaken it and undermine it. So we had this period of consensus across the political parties, not on all of the action. And some of the parties are guilty of supporting targets but not taking the action necessary. But everybody was agreed on the direction of travel and the urgency and the importance of the issue. That has now been breaking down, and both the far right and the centre right are not just abandoning that previous consensus, but some of them are now starting to echo the kind of conspiracy theories and junk science that Trump has been pushing for a long time, and others around the world on the right have been pushing. There was a point where it was the fossil fuel industry itself that was directly generating all of the conspiracy stuff. That started to die away. Now it's coming back again, and it's principally being led by this divisive post-truth kind of politics, including the MAGA movement in the US. So I don't know where Europe is going to get to on that. There is a real danger that the same kind of far-right ideas are going to continue to take root in this country and others around Europe. We have a huge task on our hands to prevent that from happening, and actually to offer to many of the people who feel alienated from politics a positive vision of the kind of change that people genuinely do need, an economy that works for everybody rather than one that works for the vested interests and the secret donors behind some of these right-wing parties. It remains to be seen which side of that critical debate is going to be successful in the years ahead.
I understand within the United States where this disinformation campaign emanates from. It's largely, again, fueled by our fossil fuel industry and these MAGA mouthpieces who kind of serve on behalf of the Republican Party, which serves on behalf of their fossil fuel donors. It all makes sense why they're pushing this here. Why do you think that it's happening in Europe, though? Is it the same fossil fuel companies? I mean, I know that you had mentioned that initially it was those fossil fuel companies. Now it just feels like disinformation for the sake of disinformation. But is there some entity behind all of this? Because I understand who offers the money that fuels right-wing politics in my country, but what is the rationale for junk science and climate change denialism over in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, very often there are fossil fuel donors behind it all, whether it's companies or very rich individuals who made their money from dirty industries. I think the point I was making is that in previous decades, it was the fossil fuel industry itself that churned this stuff out and which covered up the science that it knew itself from its own work and churned out climate denial. Nowadays, it's political proxies. It's people who are funded by those vested interests, but they're active in the political space rather than being those fossil fuel companies acting directly and using their own voice. So Reform, a far-right party in the UK, who they only have a handful of members of the UK Parliament, but they're now polling extremely well. And they have large swathes of the media, the billionaire-owned part of the media, which is sadly a growing part of our media, essentially churning out propaganda for them. They have very many donors that are from a fossil fuel background, and there are people in the Conservative Party, which used to be a centre-right party and is now basically competing with Reform for the far-right vote, the hard-right, anti-migrant, anti-net zero kind of vote. Many of those individual politicians are also funded by fossil fuel interests. I think as well there is something about that social media space. There's something about the media landscape, the information landscape that we now inhabit, which is fundamentally unhealthy. It encourages everyone to operate just in these little silos, to be in echo chambers and to have their own prejudices reinforced.
And on top of that, I mean, conspiracy theory is the currency of the internet.
Yeah.
And we've seen the way that's exploded with the Epstein stuff. That's really in the news right now, but also more broadly and more insidiously, the way that this junk science has kind of led to the demise of responsible steps toward climate change.
And it's a tragedy. It's a bit like what I was saying earlier about America in terms of its cultural impact, its innovation, how in many ways it's an extraordinary country. If you told me when I was kind of 9, 10, 11 years old growing up reading science fiction stories, if you'd shown me a device like the ones we carry around in our pockets now, and you'd told me that at the touch of a screen, everybody could communicate with everybody else, could access the sum total of human knowledge, it sounds like such an empowering, liberating, enlightening technology, and it's turned into a bin fire.
Yeah.
or it has been turned into a bin fire, often by those who are deliberately manipulating us. So we need to recognize that as human beings, we do incredible creative things, and then sometimes we do very stupid things with the creativity that we've unleashed in the world. It's not all because there are bad people. A lot of it is because of bad actors, but some of it is because of human nature that we're all guilty of. And I think we all need to take a share of responsibility for that.
Well, Mr. Harvey, I appreciate all your time. I know I can speak on behalf of a large portion of our country here in saying that, for all that the MAGA movement and Donald Trump are doing in this country, there is, and for as unfortunate as all of this looks from overseas, we're in the same boat. We're all fighting, these common enemies together. And whereas I know it's probably difficult to try and salvage the U.S.'s reputation under Donald Trump, we are kind of all fighting against the same enemy here. So I hope our reputation more broadly isn't as damaged as it feels from my vantage, and probably it feels from your vantage.
Well, we certainly want to try and achieve some progress together. We have some legal options for trying to hold Donald Trump to account for the way that he's used his Scottish property, inflated its value. That was cited in the fraud action that was taken against him in New York. So we have some legal options for how we can hold him to account here. And more power to your elbow if anyone is trying to achieve the same thing in the US.
If it's okay if I ask one last question on Donald Trump and Scotland, can you speak just for a brief moment on his fight with these wind turbines at his Scottish golf course and how that's ended up? Because he's very effective at being able to wield political, financial power here in the United States, often won't let anything stand in his way, whether it's the courts, the Constitution, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, you name it. But that didn't exactly seem to be the case in Scotland.
Yeah, well, way back before he even announced that he was going to stand for the presidency the first time round, he was active in Scotland, both buying an area called the Many Estates on the Aberdeenshire coast. Now, at the time, it had the highest level of environmental protection that Scotland can offer. It was a site of special scientific interest and other designations as well. Because of its ecological importance, it was given this protection on paper. He turns up, flashes his money and says, give me what I want or I walk away. And the government essentially capitulated and allowed him to build on this environmentally sensitive site, which has now been trashed. It's lost its environmental status because of that. And this asset, the Many Estate, the Trump golf resort there, was one of the assets whose inflated value was cited in the court action against him on fraud charges. Now, at the time, he was also, as well as just wanting to get hold of that piece of land in Scotland, he was also campaigning against renewable energy because apparently his super rich pals are so emotionally fragile that they cannot possibly see a wind turbine on the horizon while they're teeing off. I think it's quite a silly agenda that he was trying to pursue, but he tried to take legal action as well to prevent the development of what was at the time a really, really important experimental test bed for offshore wind power. I'm pleased to say that development went ahead. And actually, renewables have been one of the real success stories in the Scottish economy. Other sectors of the economy have not done so well, either in terms of economic productivity or emissions reduction. But renewable electricity production has been a phenomenal success story for Scotland. So Donald Trump didn't get his way on that one, I'm very pleased to say, even though he did manage to get his way on the golf course and to trash an environmentally important site. But it does show that you don't have to capitulate to these people. You don't have to give them what they want. And sometimes the one thing a bully really needs is to be stood up to.
Perfectly put. Mr. Harvey, thank you so much for taking the time and appreciate your leadership over there.
Many thanks for your interest and all the best.